Hi, this is Ellen Shute, and welcome to the What Drives You podcast. Today, my guest is Beth Robinson, and we will be talking about her new book, The Epiphanies Project, and her own experience with what drives you. Beth is a journalist, editor, author, ghostwriter, and coach who specializes in helping behavioral health specialists build books around life-affirming insights, as well as telling and helping others tell personal stories. She is co-author and co-curator of the Amazon best-selling The Epiphanies Project, 20 Personal Revelations, and author of the upcoming memoir, Your Last Words. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and I always appreciate your insights, and I'm anxious to hear what you have to say tonight about your work and my work.
Thank you.
So first, tell us a little bit about the Epiphanies Project.
The Epiphanies Project is a collection of 20 stories written by writers about their own experiences. The stories are about moments when they had a realization that changed the way they were going to live or what they were going to do next, or their understanding of their lives. I should say our lives, because I have a piece in it also. So,
okay. Yes, you do.
Yes, I do.
That I enjoyed very much.
Thank you.
So how did you guys come together and decide to do this project?
Well, I was in a writing group, and one of the members of the group, Chris Joseph, published his memoir about his battle with pancreatic cancer. And after he was done with it, he realized that there was a story that was very important to him that he hadn't told. And it was a story that he identified as one of those transformative moments in his life, a really kind of earth-shattering realization for him. And he approached me and said, I have this story, and I didn't put it in my book, but I'll bet a lot of other writers have a story about their own lives like this. Would you be interested in working on a collection with me? And I said, sure, I would love to. So
that's great.
And that was it. We did it. We just did it.
That's just amazing. That's amazing too, other than the book that is also very, very special. It's a special book, I have to say. So can you talk a little bit about the piece that you wrote in the book?
My piece is called Backward, and it is actually the second chapter of my memoir about my mother passing. And in this particular piece, and I'm not going to give away the whole thing because I still want people to read the book.
Yes.
But I was struggling with a lot of guilt. As many people do, had a laundry list of things I was pissed off at my mother about. And I was struggling with whether or not she knew that I loved her, because when she went, we just didn't have those kinds of conversations in our family. We certainly didn't talk about the fact that she was dying. So, so there wasn't that moment of we're acknowledging that this is the end and let's get it out. Like my last words to her were she was gone already. So, So it was really just kind of, so in the story, I'm going through some of her things and reflecting on how she would have known that I loved her.
Wow. How was it for you to write that?
It was, sort of similar to the act of crying in terms of just the release that you need when you're going through that kind of grief. So letting it out was very, very similar, I think, for me to just crying.
Okay, that's interesting. I'd love to, and maybe I will, talk to other people and see how their epiphany changed their life. Do you think that moment changed your life?
I think that the moment in question started me on Yeah, in the sense that it started me down a road of re-examining my relationship with my mother and how it looked to both of us and why it was the way it was, which really kind of, dovetails into what you're doing,
Yes.
and your book. And I don't, the rest of what comes in that book kind of built on that question I was asking myself, which was, not only did she know that I loved her, but also why would I have to ask myself that question? She was my mother.
Yes.
We were, on some level, we were awfully close. So why was that even a question for me?
Mm-hmm. So did you feel like that you answered that question for yourself, or that you just having that question was really a game changer for you?
No, I think that I spent the next 20 some chapters answering it.
Okay. That's great.
The question comes up in chapter 2. There is a little bit of an answer there. So if you read it, it's a complete story. But yeah, it took me another 20 chapters, 20 short chapters, I might add.
Okay.
To really kind of come to peace.
So I'd love to talk to you about your mother and your family in terms of the car. You understand the car metaphor. You've been in touch with it, and
yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about your family just in general?
So, my mother was 23 when I was born, which I know at the time wasn't that unusual, but it strikes me now as remarkably young since I have a daughter that age. And
yes,
I think she'd be the first to say that she's not ready to raise a child at this point. So I was the oldest. My father came from a family where there was some mental illness and some difficulty, and I think, and he was 28 when I was born, and really, I think just trying to find himself as a young man, and in his marriage, they had just gotten married when my mother found out she was pregnant with me. It's believed that I was a honeymoon baby, an actual honeymoon baby. Just doing the math. So I came into this kind of, brand new marriage, these two very young people who were really just trying to figure it out. And I think that, my story of my life, with regards to my parents, is that the two of them were kind of trying to work out their own expectations of themselves, through me in some way.
Well, I think that's I think that's almost every family, is that parents are trying to work out who they are as parents, as raising their children. I don't know if it was the case with your parents, but many parents who don't have awareness just sort of automatically on autopilot pilot in the way that they were parented. And many parents are extremely intentional about not doing what was done to them. Do you know if that applies to your parents at all?
Well, it's funny because there's a story in the book about my wedding. And I think that my mother really wanted to not parent the way her mother parented. And my grandmother was, really kind of narcissistic. And when my mom got married, my grandmother planned the whole thing. She picked everything, my mom didn't really have a lot of, say in the whole matter. And when I got married, she very much insisted that I have the wedding that I wanted. Now, we didn't really have a good discussion about the definition of that. So at all. So the way that played out was the wedding that I wanted was not one in which I made a lot of decisions about things that I didn't even know you were supposed to make decisions about, and certainly didn't care about, like what color napkins went in the bathroom, hand towels in the bathroom.
Yes.
Like, I didn't even know you were supposed to have monogrammed hand towels. And had I thought it was even a choice, I might have just argued against them altogether. But so there was this kind of tug of war about her trying to get me to make decisions about stuff. And, with the hand towels, she really wanted ivory with gold letters on them. And I was so annoyed that she was making a decision about something I didn't care about at all. I was like, I said, I don't care, pick whatever you want. Oh no, I want you to have what you want. Okay, well, if you're making me pick, we're having purple, which is my favorite color. I mean, I didn't just do it to be pissy, but I'm like, if I have to pick the color, fine, it's going to be purple. So
it's a great example, because in her trying to do things differently than were done to her, she chooses a route to go in that she thinks is going to accomplish that goal. Only, lo and behold, her child experiences it differently.
Exactly.
Right. That is the catch about being a parent, is that we make assumptions all the time about how our kids are doing and feeling. And very often we don't really know the truth. And not because we're not interested or we don't ask, but because our kids don't tell us, sometimes because they don't want to tell us, and sometimes because they're not even consciously aware of what to tell us. This is just their lived experience, but different than the parent's perception.
I do think that at some point we became clear about the hand towels.
Yes, but it remains a story, doesn't it? Right. And we all have our many stories about things that happened in their house.
Right.
Right? Yes. Some of which might surprise our parents, that's really what we're remembering and how we think about it. I remember one time one of my daughters was telling a story, and she said something about something happening at home. She said, "You weren't home." She said, "You must have been in Florida." And I looked at her and said, "What? Like, I wasn't, it's not like I was regularly in Florida or away on a very often basis. I was hardly ever in Florida. Mostly my parents had a place in Florida, but mostly when I was there, she was with me. So it was just so strange to me that was how she was remembering this as an adult, but that's how she remembered it.
Yeah, we're starting to get there in my house. My kids have reached an age where they feel very comfortable listing all their grievances. So all of my faults and failures have been,
yes,
enumerated for me.
I say the same thing. In our house, it's just the word "mom," and right. I hear that like in a restaurant or in a store, and I think that it's like my kids. But yeah, I understand it. So you were the oldest child. If you were to talk about who was in the driver's seat of your car, what would you say?
It was definitely my father.
Why?
He had very definite ideas about what everybody was supposed to be doing. And he was an incredibly intelligent man. And, and I, with great affection and respect, I would say that he was sometimes willing to like weaponize that brilliance to get you to do what he wanted you to do. Because sometimes it felt really stupid not to do it. The best example that I can think of, and probably the best example there was, is that by the age of 5, I was very clear that my responsibility in life as a human being was to gain entrance to the University of Michigan.
Okay.
I'm not sure we discussed me getting a degree from the University of Michigan, but I was supposed to get in. And I think the implication was I was supposed to get out with, with the paper in hand too. But I mean, right. From a very young age, that was it. I didn't apply to any other schools. And I didn't want to go to the University of Michigan. So.
Okay. So there's a lot I want to ask you about that.
Yeah.
So you mean when you finally went to apply to schools, you didn't want to go to the University of Michigan?
It wasn't really my first choice, but I didn't apply anywhere else because I didn't, that it just wasn't a choice for me.
So you had been conditioned to think that this was an achievement that you were hopefully expected to achieve. And if you achieved it, you would do it.
Yeah.
Do you, as an adult, how do you make sense of that coming from him? Why do you think that was so important to him?
For a lot of reasons. One of which is that he went to the University of Michigan, and I think he struggled a little bit himself. He was a bit of a troublemaker.
Okay.
At one point, they asked him to, maybe step away for a semester. But he did, and that's its own whole hilarious story. But he did eventually get a degree from the University of Michigan. He was very proud of it. But also, I think that he reflected back on his experiences there and just felt like he had gotten so much out of it. What he always said to me, and it made sense, he had very good reasons for wanting me to go there, was that when you go to a really good school, it's not just the professors who are good, it's the other students. And the conversations that you have in a coffee shop are as important as the lectures that you hear in the lecture hall. And that was true. And that is one of the great benefits of going to the University of Michigan, which I did. And I did, graduate, just to cut to the chase. And it was, on that level, it really was a great experience. But in terms of what I wanted to do with my life and the program that I really wanted to be in, to do it wasn't really the best choice for me. But I also think that part of it was he saw his job as a parent as making sure that we were as prepared as possible to become successful adults. And I think that to him, that was the best way he could make sure that happened.
Okay. So his intent was for you to be a successful adult. Right. So we talk about this a lot. His intent and your interpretation. Right. So what was your interpretation?
I actually think on some level I understood that. What I didn't understand was that there were other reasonable routes to accomplish that, and that that if I had found my own route, it could have been an equally good one.
Okay. So you really might have preferred a different route. How was that for you, that you had those thoughts throughout your education and young adulthood?
I think it was pretty stifling, but I don't think I experienced it that way at the time.
How did you experience it at the time?
That what I was supposed to do was very clear, and it was very reasonable, and that there was something wrong with me for not being able to get with the program.
Okay. So that's a really poignant example of how our parents try to do their very best for us and think that they're doing their best, and that somehow we integrate the experience to feel not like we're doing our best, and feeling maybe, did you feel like you were, maybe failure is too strong of a word, but that it wasn't bringing you what he had hoped it would bring you?
I think I just felt like I wasn't doing it right. Like if I was doing it right, it would have.
Okay. So your father throughout your life had this vision of what was going to determine that you were going to be a success.
Well, but I think it only went that far. I mean, we really never talked about what I was going to do after.
Okay.
So except to say that because so our compromise. So this is an important part of that whole story. Our compromise was that I went to the art school at the University of Michigan, which at the time was really not a great art school. There were other choices, even in state, that probably would have been better programs for me. And what I really loved doing was theater, was set in costume design. So I eventually transferred into the liberal arts school into the theater department. And the only conversation we had about any of that was that nobody makes a living in the arts.
Okay. So he's still trying to guide you in what he thinks is going to be successful for you.
Yeah, guide is a very gentle word for that. But
okay.
Yeah, he never said you can't do it, I won't allow it. He just said you're never gonna make a living. And and he, like I said, he was really a smart guy. I mean, you ignored my father's advice at your own risk was sort of how I saw it.
Right. So all of those layers of conditioning, that he was a smart guy, that he knew what he was doing, that he was successful, that he understood life in many ways. And yet so you followed the path, the advised path, with a compromise, which I think is interesting because it says to me that within your family car, there was room for you to say, okay, University of Michigan, but I want to go to the art school at University of Michigan. In some family cars, there wouldn't have been room for that, but there was that. So it allowed you to continue to have your wants and wishes that were something other than perhaps exactly what your father had hoped for.
Actually, I don't know how often, I don't know what the conversation was between my parents about this, and I don't know how often they had these kinds of conversations, but it was actually my mother who facilitated that. My mother took me up. I couldn't apply to the liberal arts program and the art school at the same time. You can only apply to one program. And if I had applied to the art school and not gotten in, I would have missed the deadline to get in altogether. So my mother made an appointment with the dean of the art school, and I went up there with my mother and my portfolio, and I opened my portfolio and showed the dean of the art school all my work. And he said, okay, cool. I'll call over to admissions and tell him you're okay with us. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, and I knew that, I mean, I had at the time the grades and test scores to get in to the school. So I really wasn't worried about getting into the art school at that point. So I went ahead and applied. But had I not had that meeting with the dean, I don't think I would have gone. So
how do you make sense of the fact that your mother asserted herself in that way and facilitated this for you?
Well, my mother later told me that she always knew that the University of Michigan was the wrong place for me.
Oh,
later.
Wait, but what did she mean by that?
I didn't have a really clear idea of what I wanted to do, and the University of Michigan is not a good place for people who aren't, there was, especially then, maybe less now, but this kind of, idea that if you're smart enough to get in, you're smart enough to get out. So there wasn't a lot of guidance. And there was really, I didn't have any kind of a counselor in the art school at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had, a painting instructor who I could go in his office and ask him questions. And he taught me how to hand roll cigarettes, and that was about it.
Those are useful life skills.
Yeah, really not so much, but and he showed me paintings and stuff. But in terms of like countering that narrative of you can't make a living in the arts, I didn't really have anybody to have that conversation with there. And I think that my mom knew that I needed a little more guidance than that. But I think this was her compromise too. I think that was, in terms of being able to confront my father on a dearly held idea. I think that was as far as she felt like she could go.
Okay. But it is, as I hear it, it is evidence that she heard you and she knew you well enough to know that this would be helpful for you. She wanted to assist you within the mandate, I guess.
I think that, this was something I didn't understand about my mother really when she was alive. But, after a year of like writing about her and reflecting on her, one of the things that I realized was that she had this latent creativity. And in fact, it turns out that it's kind of like the whole thing, there are a lot of people in the family who have it, latent or otherwise, or realized. There are writers in the family. There's one of my mom's dear cousins was a very successful lighting designer in the theater. She had an uncle who was, I think, an illustrator or a graphic artist. So there was a lot of creativity in them. And I think that she recognized my talent, which my father didn't have that. And I don't think that, he saw me draw. He didn't know if it was any better or any worse than anybody else's. But I think that my mother recognized that there was a genuine ability there. And so I think that was a big part of the difference between the two of them in terms of the way they were looking at that.
It's interesting that there was room for your mother in her generation to at least get you to the art school, but perhaps not room in her car, what she learned in her car growing up, not room for her maybe to more outwardly express that, not travel the path that she traveled in her life, which was what I believe she thought would make her successful. But yet in her daughter's generation, that's been a key thing for you, is coming to realize what it is you are here to do. Would you say that?
Yeah, because I took such a dramatic wrong turn. I don't know if it's the wrong turn. Maybe it was a necessary path. I know that you would probably say it was a necessary path, but just away from being an artist of any kind, being a creator of any kind for a long time. So I kind of think of myself as being in creative recovery.
Okay. What brought you back? What led you to know that you wanted to do this?
Well, the funny thing is I never really stopped, but I just always thought of it as being like separate from my life, if that makes sense. This was the thing that I did over here. It wasn't my life. It was this thing over here. One day I was reading a book, and it was this terrible book. I think I've told you the story. And I was just like, if this thing can get into print, I can write a book. And I literally put the book down, went inside, turned on my computer, and started writing. And wow. I don't know where I got the idea I could be a writer, but that was like exactly what I was deciding I wanted to do. And so I think it was something that was kind of like, trying to escape bondage,
Yes. Escape generational suppression. Really, that's how I see it anyway.
Yeah.
But from your bio now, it seems as though that is what you do.
Yes.
Now.
Yes.
It's allowed to become not just the thing over there.
Not only have I been writing ever since I put that book down, but I recently started doing visual arts again also. So
wow, it's fascinating. So I'd like to ask you, like, what beliefs you feel like you developed about yourself, positive ones, challenging ones, in your car growing up?
I think, it's funny because the the conflicting beliefs, one was the one that imprisoned me and the other one was the one that kind of allowed me to free myself. So, I mean, the one belief that being a creative was really not a valuable thing to be, in the sense of being a successful adult. Like that was not a way to be a successful. So the way that I was innately was not a path toward being a successful adult by the definition that I grew up with.
And that was a blatant spoken rule.
You can't make a living as an artist, right?
Yes, right. That wasn't something you intuited.
No, I didn't guess at that one. Okay. Yeah, when my father was thinking something, you rarely had to guess what it was. He was very generous in that sense. Always willing to share. But then something happened when I was about 12, it was the years of the running craze. Everybody started running. And my father, who was at the time very heavy and very out of shape, and he smoked a cigar at least once a day and, came home and had meat and potatoes and scotch. And one day he put on his deck shoes, his canoeing shoes, and went flopped around the block a couple of times. And a year later, he ran his first marathon.
Oh my. Wow.
Yeah. I think he was 42, 40. I don't know. He was a young man, but, although at the time nobody thought he was. I mean, at that time, to go do that at that age was kind of audacious. And I mean, he started eating salads, and he lost so much weight that people would walk up to my mother and say, "Is Jay okay?" I'm like, is he sick? He's like, he's lost so much weight so quickly. And he became an athlete. Almost, I mean, he'd always been athletic as a youngster and active, but, as an adult, I only knew him as, I would sit on his lap and poke him in the belly and go, "My fat daddy." I mean, so that was a pretty significant transformation. And the other thing that happened was he was a man who yelled. I mean, he would lose his temper. I mean, at the dinner table, you could look at him wrong and he would start yelling at you and send you away from dinner. And so he was the angry young man, and as he started running, I mean, that's pretty powerful medicine. And it worked a lot of that anger out of him. And he changed, his personality changed pretty substantially. I mean, not to the point where he didn't always think he was right, but at least he wasn't yelling about it. So he became a very, very different person. He got active in the community. I mean, people who know him well know him for his activities with Maccabi Games. So I saw that transformation. So I think that, when I said, okay, I'm going to go write a book, I think that idea that I could at that age, just go, all right, I'm going to be something else. I'm going to do something else. I think that came out of my family too.
So on one hand, it left you with challenges. On the other hand, it also empowered you.
I got the lock and the key from the same place.
The lock and the key. Can you think of things in your life now that are perhaps thoughts or feelings that you have that you don't think your parents ever intended for you to have, but that are ones that challenge you or prevent you from being your fullest?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is this lingering sense of what I essentially am is not what was intended, that like it's somehow a not what I was supposed to be.
Okay. So that for you, being part of your family created like this mold of who an adult was supposed to be. And with the things that have happened in your life, it has felt to you like you haven't fit into that mold.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at the things that I feel like I have failed at or don't have in my life, it's sort of like, those drawings where you see one face, but if you look at it a different way, you see a different face. It's like, if I just stop myself at that point and I look around and I go, okay, what you have created is you. This is exactly you. This is good. Like the stuff that you don't have is not really stuff you want. But I have to have that conversation with myself because all that stuff seems very important because it was kind of programmed in there.
Yes, right. So we all, as children, get these messages that were programmed in there. But I come to find out in my work now with people that many, 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 many of the messages that I hold were not intentional messages that my parents tried to give me. They were how I made sense of it. And I'm not suggesting that your parents didn't try to give you that message, but I don't believe that your parents wanted you to doubt your worthiness, which can come up if we feel like we don't fit into a mold because there's something about us that doesn't fit.
Yep.
So that thing that you said that I have to sort of remind myself and tell myself that this is okay, who I am, and it might not fit that mold, but it is who I am and I'm discovering it. That's something that I call self-compassion. So it's one of the most important parts of what drives you is trying to help people be able to have compassion with the human that they are, even if it doesn't fit what they thought they were supposed to be or their parents' idea of what they were supposed to be. And it seems like you must have used a lot of it over the years to be able to get yourself to a place where what you love now is what you do.
Yeah, I think that at some point, I mean, I really did do what I was supposed to do.
Right.
And I got myself into a terrible marriage and I was on the verge of becoming an alcoholic. And I think that moment of sitting down and deciding I could write a book was really, it was sink or swim time for my spirit.
But it swam.
Yeah.
It you got that from your car too.
Yeah.
The fact that it swam at that moment.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That was the key. Right. Yes, I can transform. I can go from being this person who's done everything she can to, shove herself into this mold. I mean, in my story, I talk about, it was an art school that I was, like the queen of hippie boho fashion. And that, by the time I got divorced, I was like, running around in floral twin sets and cropped slacks, putting away a bottle of wine every day. And like the minute I decided to get divorced, all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, that's you again with the skirts and the beads. So I think that, yeah, I think that idea that, my mother too. I mean, she around the same time that my father decided that that he was going to become an endurance athlete, she decided to go get a master's degree. So there was a lot of
modeling for you that you could make a turn and do something different.
Yeah,
that's really valuable. And that they tolerated it in each other, and you learned that it could be tolerable. Well, they might not have liked it, but they tolerated it, right?
I heard all kinds of pissing and moaning about it.
I bet. I'm sure. I mean,
he wasn't happy if she wasn't there to make dinner, and she wasn't happy if he was out running and not there to eat it.
Yes, right. I get it.
Right.
Yeah, change is really hard and painful, and everybody gets to complain. That's what I say. Right. That's what we talk about. A real car is messy because somebody in that car is complaining at all times. There's always complaints. Right.
I think it became more real over the course of my life. I mean, it's a shame. My father died when he was 61. And it's a shame because because they were just starting to get their, together as a couple.
Right. Right. It's lovely that you can appreciate that along with the sadness of the loss.
I think spending a year writing about the two of them. I mean, at one point, I had my own, adolescent list of grievances that I carried into adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And then a bunch of adult grievances on top of it. And when we were going through all the stuff in the house, I found a picture of them with, I think, my brother. So she would have been 25, and he was an infant. And I'm looking at these two people, and they're so young. Mm. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm thinking about myself at that age and all the stuff I didn't know. And, and then I was thinking about their parents, and my dad's mother was severely bipolar. She was in and out of psychiatric institutions his whole childhood. My grandfather was not a warm, fuzzy person that took up the slack of I'm going to give you a hug when you need one. He didn't get a hug when he needed. Well, he might have, but only if she wasn't getting electric shock therapy. And my grandmother, she wasn't somebody who heard anything. The world ended at the tip of her own nose, and so I knew all my grandparents, and I knew where a lot of this stuff came from. And I'm looking at these two young people, trying to find their way. And all of a sudden I was like, they did the best they could. I did the best I could as a parent. They did, and there's this huge amount of compassion that came out of getting all the grievances out and wanting to answer that question of, did she know that I loved her? Mm-hmm. And then when I saw that, it was like, how could I be mad? She started at 23 and did the best she could.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You still get to be mad and have all your feelings.
And I do
still get to, right. 100%.
And they're all in the book.
Okay, good.
It's just one long cry.
We'll be able to read them all. Thank you so much. Anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think I just told you my whole life story and
okay. That's good. I appreciate it. I appreciate you applying the concepts in What Drives You and being revealing about your own journey and your parents. I know it'll be very helpful to people.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I would like to add, actually, since you asked, and I didn't have it at the moment, that I think that a lot of that, being able to process that in that way did come from the ideas that are in your upcoming book, What Drives You, my understanding of how a family works and how we, develop our roles. I think just being armed with that information prepared me to look at my parents through that lens of compassion and, myself. Yes, definitely, as you pointed out, but also my parents. And that made it really a lot easier to let go of a lot of that stuff and just go, okay, this is just, everybody did their best. This is who we are. It's fine.
Yes, that's great to hear. Thank you. I'm glad that it was meaningful.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider going to your podcast platform, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, and leaving a review. Thanks so much. Bye.